A small body of determined spirits fired by an unquenchable faith in their mission can alter the course of history. That's a quote by Mahatma Gandhi. Certainly it is undeniable that Mahatma Gandhi and his small group did in fact change the world. Now let me ask you, do you think that small teams are best? If so, raise your hands. Why do you think small teams are better than bigger ones? There are many reasons. Better clarification of purpose, better clarification about who's doing what. Easier to get agreement, easier to get action, but probably the biggest reason small teams are best is because there's no person, entity, or organization that's stopping them from moving forward. Instead of focusing on what cannot be done, they're busy doing it. Today I'm going to give you 3 actual examples of actual small teams in action. But before that, I'm going to talk about some research that has been done regarding team size. This first study had to do with teams on an assembly line. The question was, if you added more team members, would that increase the production? What they found was that at a certain point, they were torn between processing the information or producing the output. In other words, the effort of coordinating the work wiped out any progress they made on producing the output. So it didn't really help. For instance, if you have an 11-person assembly team, they produce 7 units. If you have a 15-person assembly team, they produce 9 units. What that means is that proportionately, the 11-member team is more productive. Zinger and Lawrence did some research regarding problem-solving teams, and they found that the same thing was true for those types of teams. Teams that are involved, like a cross-functional team that's involved in new product development, for instance, when they added more people, it became harder to get the work produced. Think of it. There's just a lot more complexity in terms of communication when you have a bigger team. Take a look at this visual. This shows you that when there's 4 people on a team, there's 6 links. And if there's 10 people on a team, there's 45 links. Much more complex. It's just much harder to communicate, and it's much harder to coordinate the contributions of each and every person. More difficult. There was some research done at the beginning of the 21st century by a gentleman named Ringelmann. He was a German psychologist. He wanted to look at if the size of the team affected the amount of effort that a person would put into something. What he discovered was that as you added more people to a team, the overall effort decreased. For instance, he looked at physical strength. He had men participate in a tug of war. He pitted 1 against 1, and that produced a certain amount of effort. Then he had a team of 8 compete with a team of 8. What he found was that in that team of 8, when it was 8, each man would put out only 49% of the effort that they would put out when it was one-on-one. Definitely made a difference. There were some more researchers that wanted to know, well, was that really because of effort, or did it have to do with coordination issues or other issues? So they did some more experiments, and they verified that yes, it did have to do with effort. Additional researchers looked at problem-solving teams and what would happen if you add more people. They found that as you add more people, you have more non-participating team members, people that are just really not contributing that much to the overall team result. Think about when you have a cross-functional team. That's a situation where each and every person on that team, where you need their input in order for it to work. it's important to keep in mind that as you make the team bigger, that's going to be harder to do. What about, let me ask you this, how many people do you think is ideal for a software development project? Well, there was a study that looked at 58 software development teams to try to figure this out. What it showed was that the top 5 teams had 3 to 6 team members, and the bottom 5 had 7 to 9 team members. They wanted to know, well, what if you look at new product development teams in other industries? So they looked at medical devices, automotive, high-tech machine tools, construction. They looked at a lot of different industries, and they found the same thing was true. Smaller teams worked out better. There was also a study done in the Netherlands that looked at 30 project teams. These were teams in the engineering and construction, building and utilities industries. What it showed was that the teams that worked out best were those where the people were familiar with each other, where there was stability, and they worked together over time. In other words, a small team. That's what worked out better. Now I'm going to start to go into these actual examples to illustrate this in action. My first example took place at MasterCard. MasterCard had, from 1987 until 1997, they launched 5 different ad campaigns. And guess what happened? They all flopped. Visa was way ahead of them at this point. They had to do something. So they got rid of their current ad agency and they brought in a new one. They brought in McCann Erickson. McCann Erickson put their top creative team on this. That was the team of Thomas Bors and Cranen. They were a seasoned team. They had worked together well on many projects. They were always able to put everything out on the table and discuss the issues openly. That was important. They had 1 month to prepare their pitch. One day, Cranen was in the shower and a light bulb went off. It just came to him. Some things money can't buy. He went back to the office and he was all enthused, and the others caught this enthusiasm from him. Then 2 weeks later, Thomas and Bors met on a Sunday morning for coffee and bagels. They were kicking around ideas. And all of a sudden a breakthrough idea came to them. They came up with the setup word, priceless. They could picture the ad. It would be setting would be a baseball game. It would feature a number of normal transactions and then end up with the setup, priceless. As you know, this ad was a mega hit. It did dramatic things for MasterCard. Since 1997, they have been adding new credit cards at twice Visa's rate. It also worked globally. It was translated into 48 different languages, and they featured it in 105 different countries. It was a very simple, versatile format. It worked. Fortune magazine has cited this small team as being one of the 6 teams that changed the world. This next team was even smaller. I'm talking about the team of Leopold Menace and Leopold Godowski, the inventors of Kodachrome film for Kodak. How many of you know this story? Raise your hands. Okay, well, if you don't, this is very fascinating. The way this all got started was when these 2 men were teenagers. In 1917, they went to a movie theater in Manhattan and they saw a movie called Our Navy. The picture quality was terrible, but that inspired them. They went back to their high school physics lab and started conducting experiments and tweaking with lenses, and eventually they did create a double lens camera. Their parents were musicians and they were well known in the theater world, and because of their connections they were able to arranged for this camera to be used in one of these theaters. Rutherford let them test it. It turned out the picture quality really was better. The problem was that the projectionist complained about it because it was really difficult to focus it, so that didn't fly. So they had to go back to the drawing board. Once they graduated from college and returned back to New York City, they decided to make a change, to switch their approach from using multiple lens camera to using multiple layered film. In other words, to switch from an optical to a chemical approach. This was a huge departure from anything that was being done at the time. They did a lot of chemical experiments in their parents' apartments, kitchens and bathrooms. Then one day, Louis Strauss from the investment firm Kuhn Loeb & Company came to visit them. He thought that perhaps that company, their company, might want to invest in their chemical research. He wanted to see what they were doing, so they started to develop some film to show him. It just so happened that this was a really cold day. This meant that it was taking a lot longer than usual for the film to develop. This gave them an opportunity to play for him some Beethoven sonatas, which they did. Then eventually the film was ready. They showed him. He was really impressed. He made them a $20,000 loan. They were ecstatic. Now they could really pursue this research in a bigger way. In 1924, they patented a double lens. They were able to patent a double-coated process using a two-plate system. In 1927, they agreed to pursue a three-color process, but they were keeping in mind the diffusion process they had just patented. In 1929, they started to run out of money. They went to the Chemist Club in Manhattan. There they met C.E.K. Mies, the director of research at Kodak Labs. Mies realized that Kodak had some materials and substances that really might be useful to them. He told them, he got really excited about what they were doing, and he decided to make them an offer. He said, I will pay you two $30,000, that way you can repay your loan with the investment company, plus I will pay you each $7,500 salary a year, and you can keep any royalties on any patents you have up to now. They were thrilled. This was great. So they continued to work really hard. They set up shop in a Broadway hotel room. Unfortunately, that facility just really was not adequate for what they were doing. Eventually what they did is that they moved over to the Rochester Kodak Lab. There they had access to much better equipment as well as Kodak scientists who really did help them out. I believe that their music careers, enhanced the creative sides of their brain, and I believe that that is probably why they were able to do ultimately what the Kodak scientists were not able to do. In any case, music definitely played a big part in their accomplishments. Developing film required very specific time stages of development. They could not use a radiant dial stopwatch to time it because that much light would destroy the whole process. Instead, what they did is that they whistled the final movement of Brahms' C minor symphony at the rate of 2 beats per second. That worked perfectly. They were quickly approaching the end of 1933. They had had a 3-year contract and it was just about to be up. They scheduled a meeting with Mies to talk to him. When they sat down with him, they told him, we have perfected a 2-color home movie process. Mies, he thought that was great. He was really excited about that. He gave them a year extension. And Mies then went back to Kodak and said to them, I think we should produce this product, this home movie process, a product on that. Kodak worked very hard to get their manufacturing and their marketing departments up to speed with this new product, but it took longer than they were expecting, and they weren't ready until 1935. But it turned out by then that Mans and Godowski actually did, at that point, succeed in perfecting the three-color process. This was the birth of Kodachrome film. Just so you can appreciate what a dramatic breakthrough this was, take a look at the difference in the dye images that are shown here. As you can see, the Kodachrome is smooth and grainless as compared with the others. This film also helped with breakthroughs in astronomy. Here you see a 1939 photograph of Saturn. A really good picture, even by today's standards. This amazing revolutionary achievement happened because these two part-time workers, they weren't even employed by Kodak, were able to create a dramatic new invention. Incredible. Finally, my last example of why small teams are best happened at the Lockheed Skunk Works. This is all about the story of the development of the SR-71 Blackbird spy plane. The Skunk Works at Lockheed had tried to develop a spy plane that would evade radar, but the problem is they couldn't get one that would do that. It's not a very good spy plane if it doesn't. They put their top guy in charge of this project, Kelly Johnson, an aeronautical engineer. He had a lot of clout at Lockheed. He had the ability to protect his team from the Lockheed bureaucracy, and he was also able to keep military officials from snooping around too much and interfering with what they were doing. It was a top secret project. Johnson put them in a nondescript, unnoticeable area of Lockheed because he didn't even want others at Lockheed to know what they were doing. Just to tell you how makeshift this all was, in order to look at their wind tunnel results, they put two discs. They stretched a door between two discs, and that was the surface that they looked at those on. They were just keeping a very low profile. He was also very selective about who he put on this team. He did not use any old aeronautical designers. He picked all new engineers. He picked those that he believed would have an open mind that could take a fresh approach to this. Plus, he put them right next to the metal workers so that they would not draft anything that they couldn't build. This was a process that took many iterations. They couldn't just sit down and make a drawing and then crank this out. What they would do is come up with a design. They would identify certain features that were good and then incorporate those in the next design and so on. So it took a lot of iterations. They had only 20 months to do this in, so they were under a lot of time pressure. They were working with slide rules and a drafting board, which is really a tough tools to be working with, very slow as compared with today's standards. The key to how they were ultimately successful is that they were able to develop all new technologies from scratch that made this work. For instance, the skin, the bulk of the structure was made with a titanium alloy. This material could handle heat of 600 to 900 degrees Fahrenheit, very hot. It was also very special because it weighed half as much as steel, yet it had the same strength as steel. They put a lot of all new composite materials into this aircraft. They had heat-resistant fuel, oil, and hydraulic fluids that they put in it that could handle a height of 100,000 feet up in the air and traveling at 3,000 miles per hour. This was an amazing, amazing aircraft that they invented. Ben Rich he was a leader in the group, and he came out with the idea, let's paint it black. Well, Kelly Johnson was really opposed to doing anything that would add weight, and it did add 60 pounds of weight to the aircraft. But the thing is, you have to weigh that against the fact that it brought the internal temperature down by 86 degrees. So the trade-off was worth it in the end. Ben Rich also helped them to create a smart fuel system, a fuel system that would be able to put the warmest fuel directly into the engine and warm up the other parts of the fuel. It was also designed so that it would balance the plane so it was real stable in the air. It was an excellent fuel system. Then there's the engine. They used the J58 Pratt & Whitney engine. When they first got it, it was able to produce 26,000 pounds of thrust using an afterburner. However, the Lockheed Skunk Works team got together with the Pratt & Whitney team, and they together were able to ratchet that thing up so that it would produce 32,500 pounds of thrust. That's the equivalent of the thrust produced by the 4 turbines of the Queen Mary. A lot of energy. They had a lot of obstacles to overcome. It was very difficult to get this plane to work, but they did it. They overcame every obstacle. Then on April 30th, 1962, the very first successful flight of the SR-71 Blackbird took off. Major Brian Schull talked about how this aircraft helped him to survive many surface-to-air missile attacks because this plane was so effective. Henry Kissinger took advantage of this aircraft during the Yom Kippur War. He had a meeting coming up with Prime Minister Golda Meir. What he did is he had this aircraft to fly over the battlefield and take pictures on 2 successive days. Then he went into a meeting with her, and she says to him, "We've halted our troop advancements." Then Kissinger just plopped these pictures down on the table. She was a bit embarrassed because obviously that wasn't true. The point is this helped to advance the diplomatic relations and move things forward for them. This plane flew higher, faster, and farther than any aircraft ever before in history. It was in service for 30 years. This aircraft was built by this small team that was very committed, very diligent, and had just an unending supply of optimism. Small teams are best. Research shows us many reasons why this is true. Today I talked about a modern assembly line team and how you can't just add more people and expect to end up with more output because they're torn between producing the work and information processing, coordinating their work. Doesn't work. Smaller teams are best. There was additional researchers that looked at problem-solving teams, and they found that the same thing was true. Smaller team works best. Then there were some other experiments that looked at effort. And what they found was that people on a smaller team will put out more effort. I gave you 3 examples today of small teams in action. The first example took place at MasterCard. I'm talking about the advertising team at McCann Erickson that came out with the game-changing advertising campaign that had the punchline "Priceless." Number 2, the 2 part-time musicians who were also inventors, Leopold Mattis and Leopold Godowski, who came up with Kodachrome film for Kodak. And number 3, the Skunk Works team at Lockheed, about 6 engineers that produced the SR-71 Blackbird spy plane. It had unprecedented stealth capability. Each of these teams was nimble. Each of these teams was composed of team members who worked well together. Each of these teams was fired up by an unquenchable faith in their mission. Remember, you do not have to have a whole lot of people on your team in order to do great things. Your small team can do amazing things.